would like to welcome you to Leading Through Crisis, How CI Saves the Day at WOW. This is an episode of Continuous Improvement Leadership Live, and today we have some great speakers here to share their stories and experience with you. We have a couple of housekeeping items to take care of before we start with our guest speakers. So first, this webinar is being recorded. This webinar will be available to you starting tomorrow morning and through the rest of the month. So if you have to step away to make a phone call, don't worry. You can come back and you can watch the remainder of the webinar when you have time. This webinar will be on our website through the end of May. After that, it will always be available to members of Continuous Improvement International. And to tell you a little bit about our agenda, how our webinar works, we'll have just a couple of minutes of short introductions, and then we'll turn it over to Jennifer, Neil, and Dave to tell you their story. We want to make sure that we have plenty of time for Q&A. So we'll leave about 10 minutes at the end of the webinar for Q&A. But feel free to type those Q&A questions into that tab in Zoom at any time. We might stop and take a couple of questions along the way, but we will certainly get to those questions at the end. We'll also make sure that we wrap up our webinar at 1:50 or about 10 minutes before the top of the hour. We love our 50-minute meetings. When you go from meeting back to back to back, you never get a break. So here at CII, we do 50-minute meetings, and we would love for you to do 50-minute meetings as well. That gives you a little bit of break so you can stretch, you can refill your cup of coffee, and you can get to your next meeting on time so no one has to wait for you. And finally, at the end of our webinar, a survey will pop up in the window. It's a Surveymonkey survey. Please take just about 2 minutes to take that survey. Let us know what you think about today's webinar, and please let us know if you have other topics that you would like us to cover. We want to bring content that's relevant to you, that's relevant to today. And if you want to be a guest speaker, please let us know that as well. We're always looking for great people who want to share their stories. And finally, what is Continuous Improvement International? You know, I've been in continuous improvement for over a decade, and some days it's a struggle. It's a struggle to find people who are willing to support you. It's a struggle to find people who understand the value of continuous improvement, or sometimes you just don't even know where to take your project to the next step. CII is about providing you the support that you need to be successful in continuous improvement, and to provide you that supportive community of other professionals that come together and solve problems together collaboratively. So I had been looking high and low for an organization like this and simply couldn't find one. And that's why I decided to start it myself. So continuous improvement is that fresh, modern professional society for people who are working in continuous improvement and process improvement. If you haven't joined, definitely join today at continuous-improvement.com. Now, let's get to introducing our guest speakers who have been waiting so patiently and are really excited to tell you their stories. So first, I would like to introduce Jennifer Petit. So Jennifer is the Senior Director of Process and Analysis at WOW. WOW is the 6th largest residential cable provider in the US, and it serves about 800,000 customers. So Jennifer heads up a lot of continuous improvement initiatives at WOW. She led an initiative to deploy a continuous improvement enabling platform called LINQ. And that was used to define WOW's sales and delivery processes for VoIP, resulting in over $1 million of annual operating savings for the company. So Jennifer is currently leading the effort to redefine customer installation and service processes to help WOW service their customers without sending employees into homes. It's been an ongoing effort for WOW, and it has jumped to the top of their priority as a central focus for their organization. So it's our first guest speaker is Jennifer.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Yeah. Allison, did you want me to go ahead?
Let me introduce Neil and Dave, and then I'll let you take it away.
Thanks.
So next I'd like to introduce Neil Calvert. Neil is the CEO of LINQ, and he's a digital transformation pioneer. He's a founder and inventor of LINQ and is an expert in helping companies extract value from the information that drives their businesses. He's currently helping companies like WOW understand how to put their business data on the offensive to thrive through crises like the COVID pandemic and come out to the other side ready to accelerate towards their new normal. Hi, Neil.
Hi, Alison. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And our panel MC for today is Dave Harris. Dave is the CEO of MagikMinds. Dave and the MagikMinds team help utilities and ISPs like WOW plan and execute CI initiatives using the LINQ platform. So I'm going to hand it off to Dave and Neil and Jennifer. You guys can take it away.
All right. Can you hear me? I don't see myself.
You should be coming up in just a moment.
Okay. You can hear me though, right?
Yeah. So,
okay, awesome.
Yeah,
So
link's just a little bit laggy, but go ahead.
Okay. So just want to make sure I wasn't talking to myself. So thanks, Allison, and thanks to the you and the CII crew for bringing us all together today. And good afternoon, everyone. So Jennifer and I are coming at you from our respective bunkers in Denver, Colorado. This is the Denver skyline behind me. And Neil is a day ahead of us, actually, in Wellington, New Zealand. So welcome to you both. Let's get started. Jennifer, why don't you just tell us a little bit about WOW and what your team is doing at WOW?
Sure. Thanks, Dave. WOW is the 6th largest cable operator in the US. We operate in the states that you see illustrated in blue there. And it's really interesting. We have an aggregate of 19 markets serving just over 800,000 customers. That timeline at the top that you see there is really telling. That indicates our acquisition timeline, which is making us a company combined of 6 separate companies, properties from Ameritech, Knology, other telco providers that some of you may be aware of. What this really means is that we are very complex under the covers. We try to sell very standard products and services to help everyone, especially now when we need internet more than ever. And of course, we're enjoying our Netflix obsessively. The challenge is that we do have varied processes across these 6 different entities. And so any given day when we try to sell more of something, it really takes an inordinate effort to make that happen across a variety of platforms. So our complexity is real and it's getting in the way.
So before we dive into what you guys have been doing, post-COVID, let's talk a little bit about what your team was focused on, BC, let me say, before coronavirus. So what were your priorities and how'd your team approach them?
Yeah, so as any company, we're hoping to grow. The challenge was, in particular, WOW had always been a residential cable provider. We were hoping to break into the commercial space more adamantly because we knew there was opportunity there. However, we knew that one of our flagship products, in particular hosted VoIP, really couldn't scale effectively. I had a call with the woman who ran our NOC at the time, and she was concerned. She'd been given a directive that they had to push through so many more orders, and she was frankly concerned that that really couldn't scale at all, and it was going to burden her business and actually become a detriment. So she reached out to me. At the time I was leading a geospatial team, which is how I got to know Dave and Neil. And Dave said, hey, I got this great tool you might want to take a look at called LINQ. We had lunch. I was sold immediately, and I really believed, like instantly, I'd never seen anything like it. And the reason I liked it is because I could go back to this leader of our NOC and say, hey, let's unpack the process of how we sell and deliver commercial hosted VoIP. So that's what we did. Our other focus and challenges were just how do we get that revenue faster? Commercial is a nice revenue generator, but if it takes forever to get it, it deteriorates that efficiency. So we wanted to look at how we could go faster. Really wanted to improve the customer experience. Of course, customer experience is all the rage these days. It's so important. And we knew that there was something clunky going on, but we couldn't quite put our finger on it. And of course, we wanted to increase automation. The more you look at that tangled spider web, you have to believe there's a better way in there systematically. We just didn't know exactly where to go to find it.
So is that what we're looking at there with the 7.5%?
Yeah. So this is one of my favorite things about LINQ. And if I had all day, I'd indulge everyone on all of the dashboards that are available. But this to me was where I got to see what was really going on in our business. So we took opportunity to create what they call a canvas, which is a way of, I call it Visio on steroids. Neil knows that I think the world of LINQ, because what it does is it allows you to do the same behavior, which is model your process, but you can add attribute information about your process, which means not only do I understand how things flow through the mechanism, but now I can understand how long it takes, how many people are involved, how much it's costing me, any other variety of metrics that I want to look at. It's a very configurable system. In this case, we wanted to look at how automated are we? How many times are we reaching out to the customer? And where do we have opportunities? So this dashboard, we had a big aha moment when we did our canvas, we linked everything up, and we spit out the dashboard, and we went, what? But it's incredibly right. And so that gave us some juice to kind of go say, okay, well, where could we introduce automation? And remember, automation can just be making two systems talk to each other, right? And that's what we found, is that we have a lot of systems doing good things, but often the handoffs between were manual. So automation can be small, it can be large. In this case, we found a couple places where we could just have processes accomplish some automation. We could also have systems talk to each other. So this was glorious. And if I was live on this slide, I would hover over that bubble there on the top right. And what was really interesting is the majority of our systems that had a big role to play in our hosted web delivery were things like Excel, Access, Bing, Google Maps, GIS systems, all randomly happening in different ways across the company. So our first thought was, well, let's make sure we're using one flavor of each of those and not many. So that bubble told me a lot about where the heaviest hitting impacts were and what we might think about doing with those.
So what about the customer experience, the touch points? What did you guys find when you looked at the current state?
Well, we knew we were congested in our process, and we knew it was a high touch product. We'd heard that before, but it turns out we reached out to the customer, engaged with the customer 20 different times throughout the entire hosted VoIP workflow. Now, that might be right or wrong, right? You can't really say, well, that's wrong. It's just like, that seems like a lot. If I'm a customer, I don't think I want you contacting me 20 different times for different things. So that was an aha that really caught our executives' attention. And I think that's where we started to get a foothold in getting them to care about this, is that we were able to say, hey, you're only 7% automated. You're talking to the customer or engaging with them 20 different times. Is that the right number? And I think it's not here. Again, I'd love to be able to show more, but we have something called a balanced scorecard. And what we realized in the balanced scorecard is a lot of money was being spent up front to the tune of almost $2 million just in the first half of our process to identify, sell, and start to provision that customer. So lots of customer touch points, very little automation, and a whole lot of money that we weren't sure was the right amount to be spending.
So if you just before we switch to the next slide, people remember a couple numbers there. 37 unique systems in use for the current state, 7.5%. Why don't you flip over to the next slide and talk about the future state that you designed?
Mm-hmm. Thanks. And Neil's going to talk later about digital twin, and I want to just connect those dots for everyone, because when he says digital twin, we say future state. And what that means to us is we were able to take a look at those challenges in our current state and start thinking about what it could look like if we did certain things and model that. So what Dave's referring to here is that we modeled the opportunity to make some of those systems talk to each other. And just with that effort alone, we were able to model an increase of 30% efficiency, up from 7.5 in our automation. So this is where you start to see a business case emerge. And this is where our executives started paying attention, because when we looked at bringing down the unique systems here, you can see there's less systems. They're talking to each other more often, and we're getting manual work out of the process. So that in and of itself is wonderful continuous improvement. And what I like about it is we didn't have to go write checks for millions of dollars to figure this out with a consulting firm. We just plugged it into the software, we played with some ideas, and we played with them over and over and over. You can create as many future states as you want. We have one for, hey, what if we use GIS more robustly? What if we made these systems talk to each other? And so in each case, like I said, you kind of come away with a quantifiable business case for change. And at least in my career, I always feel like change is implemented so erratically. A lot of big ideas from smart people kind of make it to the table, and then you really don't know if you ever got your value. This is where I love the conversation happening up front to say, what kind of value could we quantify, and is this the right way to go? And you play with it until it feels like the right place to move forward. So I think it creates efficiencies for business, especially at a time when we're capital sensitive and we don't want to necessarily outsource our intelligence to other companies who want to maybe give us some insider tips on what might be automated. We can do it here with our own business expertise and kind of see how far we get. That's a big win for any executives who's trying to, save costs and increase efficiencies.
And then I think on the next slide, you'll see this is really the one you bring to your executives, right? That summarizes the whole situation.
This is my favorite. It's because really what you can see is you can quantify the beginning state in sketch 1 and sketch 2. So imagine what I was talking about, where you have the current state and a future state. LINQ actually allows you to compare those two together and then spit out a variation report. And so that's what this really is a way of saying, okay, in your current state, you have 92 92 unique information products, 90 unique actions, you have 18 people. This is how you're running your business today, and it's costing you this much money. We were in for $2 million. And the hours are interesting too for anyone who's looking at trying to accelerate revenue or just get a better customer experience together. Hours matter, right? How much time are my people spending to accomplish this thing? On the right-hand side, you can see that with the future state model that we did to increase the automation, reduce manual handoffs, start to improve processes, we were able to model a decrease in cost of almost half. Also hours sliced in half. And then this is sensitive, so I don't say this with a tremendous amount of pride, I just say it as a fact. We had ability to have less people involved in the flow as well. So I know there's delicate topics sometimes, and that's why I think of those folks who are here and our leaders. You're going to make some difficult decisions. You're going to have some interesting insights that are going to affect your business and they're going to affect your people. So I love that you can do this analysis up front and say, is that really the right thing to do? Can we repurpose those people? Because ideally you are constraining how much you have to put in to get something out of it, and that can be, again, a sensitive topic. So with that, again, this kind of spits it out and creates the business case, and I can go to an executive and say, look, underneath I can show you all the touch points that make this up, but really at the end of the day, if you look at this future state recommendation, this is the dollar savings you could see, this is the increased revenue you could see. And so far that's been received really well by our leaders. I think they feel like it's data-driven decision making. It's no longer guesswork. And even the people who did do guesswork before are even empowered now to make more of a case for their change recommendations.
That's great. So let's pivot over to Neil, bringing into the conversation here. Jennifer mentioned the digital twin and that methodology. Why don't you dig into a little more detail there and tell us what it's about and some of the potential uses?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Dave. So the concept of digital twin really is just an evolution of the things we already see happening in this space, but they're from an engineering perspective. So actually, let's rewind, think back to maybe the movie Apollo 13, which I'm sure everyone on the webinar has seen. They had a failure of the CO2 scrubber in the space vehicle. And if you remember how they ended up coming up with a solution, it was because it was able to be replicated on Earth. They had, I think, half a dozen actual replicas of the space module within the NASA facility. They used the equipment that was in the module, and they just radioed the solution back to the space module, and we know it was a success story. That's kind of the analog version, where you have a replica of something far away from where the real asset is. So we saw, as we've ended up being able to take advantage of compute power, NASA really have been pioneering the whole concept of digital twins. So since 1980, really, they've been using this concept to model space vehicles. But then we see it extending into the engineering space, and you'll have no doubt seen models of jet engines and wind turbines, and now Tesla cars. Every Tesla has a digital twin, a model, the physical car packed full of sensors. In fact, the LiDAR system on a Tesla car, it generates something in the region of 7.5 gigs of data a second. So that all that content is being transmitted back to the model, and they use the digital twin to understand what's happening to the vehicle. And they can even apply updates to the car via the software and firmware update by understanding the data that they're receiving. So we've taken that idea and said, well, why can't we do the same with an organization? An organization actually is pretty well structured if you get down to the fundamental elements. And through the slides that Jennifer has shown, you'll have seen 4 entities keep cropping up: information, action, system, and people. So what we said is, well, the twin of the business is specifically understanding the relationships between those 4 things. How is work done? What content do people need to have access to be able to do their work, perform their action? And what do they create as a result of doing that work? Well, they create more content, which then enables the next action to take place. So we see this chain of action information running through the organization. And then people and systems become the enabler of that. So people perform actions using a system. We're doing that right now. We're using Zoom webinar to perform an action. We knew what we needed as content to be able to perform this action. And as a result, people are gaining knowledge. So that's the creation of information. But then we see systems and automating actions. And Jennifer's just shown a couple of slides of how that dashboard really helps understand the technical DNA of an organization and where systems are helping us do our work better. And then, of course, information exists in systems. So we have that connection as well. How does this Excel spreadsheet allow somebody to do this work? How does this CRM contain the customer information that we need? So the digital twin of the organization is this representation in the model of how the business works, who does what, why do they do it? So there's a definite connection around the purpose of the content for the business and how business outcomes are enabled to create the value the organization needs. So in a nutshell, that's what we're trying to achieve with this type of modeling.
So what are some of your customers doing now? Since post-pandemic, or middle of pandemic, I should say, maybe not quite for you, Neil, but those of us in other parts of the world, what are some of your customers doing with the digital twin to address some of the challenges they're facing?
Sure. So let me give you a specific COVID example. We've recently worked with an organization. They're into document management, right? So they collect content from people, they store it, they destroy it, they archive it, they scan it. So they create structured content out of paper assets effectively. They had a very large contract to move a lot of boxes of content. Then COVID came along. And as a result, they lost 75% of their temporary workforce. Now that's a huge hit, right? You're in the middle of running this contract over a number of months, and then 3/4 of your workforce gone because they stay at home. So obviously, that's a pretty critical position for that organization. And how do you survive through through a lack of workforce like that? So we were able to apply LINQ into the organization. Understood how they were operating today and what those people did and the processes they followed, but also then come up with this future state for them. Now, how might you still achieve the same level of work in the environment that you have now found yourself? And what the modeling showed them was not only could they meet the actual requirements of the contract, they could do that without having to rehire their temporary staff. They could do it faster, so fewer hours required in order to produce the outcomes that they needed, and save operational money as part of that. So they ended up saving in excess of $20,000 a year. Doesn't sound like big numbers. Jennifer's talking about millions of dollars, but I think that just shows that change doesn't need to be massive. We don't need to believe we're successful because we've got 7-figure savings. You know, a 5-figure saving for a smaller organization is a big deal, but they also put more than 1,000 hours back into the organization.
Mhm.
So they've come out of the analysis with COVID as being the initiator of forced change, realizing they can operate as an organization more efficiently, more effectively. They can actually take on more work without having to increase their workforce. Now, again, sensitive topic because we talk about the impact on people. And obviously that's forefront as part of change leaders is how are people adapting to the change? And often we find it's not about, I just rip those people out of the organization, but I can reallocate them. I can have them do more valuable work. And in the case of, you know, this organization that we worked with, that might not actually be the case, but they know they can scale their business now, and they can rehire based on what they actually need rather than I solve a problem by just putting a bum on a seat, which is often what we see, right? It's easy to fix a problem and say, oh, we'll just get somebody else to do that work. It's relatively cheap. It's easy, but we found that in times of crisis like COVID, those aren't necessarily the right decisions to have been made. We need to be thinking bigger and having some robustness in the organization. And that's the outcome that LINQ's enabled this business. They have some resilience. They'll be able to adapt next time, if there is a next time, and you know probably there will be. But also they've got their plan in place in terms of how do we accelerate through this and thrive as an organization. Using COVID as really being the initiator of that transformation and that change.
That's great. So I like to think of it as freeing up people to work on the, you know, that list that you have that are high value, but they always seem to kind of fall to the wayside. I think, you know, going through an exercise like this really lets you think about the future and start thinking about how you're going to use resources, you know, in the new normal or whatever you want to call it.
Definitely.
Right?
Who hasn't got a stack in their inbox, right, of things that it just gets piled on top of that stack as opposed to the stack reducing. And I think that's one of the definite outcomes from this type of knowledge creation inside the businesses. Are people doing the most valuable work that impacts the outcomes that the organization needs? And if we're not, how do we free them up to do that work? Because that obviously has benefit for the business. So absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So let's bring it back to you, Jennifer. So we're in pandemic world. Your priorities have changed. What's bubbled to the top of the list for WOW, and how's your team adjusted?
Yeah, thank you. Everybody's adjusting. WOW is certainly an important resource, right, as an internet provider. And yet most people experience internet with someone in the home, tech in the home, someone helping them get their internet established, whether it's Wi-Fi, home Wi-Fi, or other complementary products. And so the first order of business was to make sure we could get as many techs out of the home as possible quickly. And I want to reflect on something Neil had said, which is, you know, sometimes you don't have time for big fancy solutions, and sometimes process is just fine. You can change things with process. And what we found was really powerful when it came to reacting to COVID with simple process changes. It kind of makes me want to reflect on what we did BC, because as an output of that LINQ model, we actually adjusted the process where instead of having two people, an account manager and an order manager involved, we collapsed those roles. We introduced a checklist up front to make sure there was less manual handoffs and reason to contact the customer. And we took that philosophy into the process mindset for SIK, what we call self-install kits for COVID reaction. And what we realized is going back to those people and saying, what is our process to deliver, for example, high-speed internet today? We unpacked it, we modeled it, we looked at it, and we said, wait, there's some things we can do differently immediately. And it was really interesting because our CIO, who I report up through, had given us a directive. I think we all went home on March 16th. You know, he made the declaration, we need to have the tech safe as soon as possible. Please have something in place by April 20th. And there was some kind of wrangling of that on the other side of the business, specifically within IT, and they kind of said, we're not getting anywhere. Why don't we come over to the process team, which is my team today, and unpack it even further and be really methodical. And we realized, you know, we could do some things immediately, like have the tech leave the equipment on the porch, interact with the customer through a phone call externally, right, at a safe distance. We had some products that were already being shipped, and we realized we could enhance those to have more online tutorials pretty quickly. You know, we could create content with our marketing teams and our sales teams to meet that need. So things started happening rather quickly, and we actually had our majority of our solution, I would say 90% of it, in place by April 7th. So pleasantly surprised our CEO, let me tell you. I think he was kind of blown away, and he was actually sharing that our board was blown away as well. I think they really thought there was going to be a heavy lift here, because self-install was something WOW always wanted to do. We knew it was the right way to evolve our business, but it never really raised up to the level of something we would actually work on. Bigger stuff took priority, but all of a sudden here it was front and center. And I think, again, the lingering perception was, this is hard. It's going to take a lot to do this. Well, actually, when we really unpacked it, had some important conversations, it wasn't that hard. Now, what does that mean going forward? We're going to get better at self-install. Like, it's not perfect. There's things that we would love to do better, and there's things that are more complex that are not so easy to self-install, like more traditional video products that involve a box in the home and such. But we're actually ramping down sales of those to be more of a content provider over the internet, so IP-based services. So we're going to keep fine-tuning which products qualify for self-install and doing more to get the text out of the home. But really the bigger picture is we've always needed to be more efficient. So COVID is just forcing that issue. On the screen here, you look at employee and customer safety. That's the obvious one. But cost reduction, that's a global concern, right? Everybody wants to do their business more efficiently. And so capital efficiency is very top of mind right now, and business simplification, very top of mind. It's always been something we think about. We just are now taking it with a more urgent tone. And so we go back to LINQ, and we're starting to look at self-install, and we're modeling which products are really going to receive treatment that is going to have a good outcome and a good customer experience. And there might be some that we leave on the table and just say those still really do require tech, but let's right size our tech workforce. Let's redeploy those techs to other activities if possible. Let's just juggle things a bit to see if we can get to the right combination of things that help us earn money and win customers, right?
Yeah, and I think the self-install kit covers all three of those, right? You end up with fewer truck rolls, which I assume is a pretty large cost for your organization.
Yes.
Yeah.
We saw those reduced by 60,000 actually in the last 60-ish days, saving significant money for us.
Wow.
Yeah, it was, I mean, really, when I say my CIO was pleasantly surprised, it's not an understatement. I think the reality is it had always been something that we needed to do. We just didn't really understand how impactful it could be. So now we do. And again, it's data driven, right? We're seeing this opportunity to say, hey, here's how many truck rolls you can take out. If you just put this box on the porch, if you just create some online materials, we can start to really do this as a real thing, not just a Band-Aid.
That's great. So, Allison, I don't know if we want to look at questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go to some Q&A. So for those on the phone, if you look at your kind of Zoom control panel, there's a Q&A button, and you can just type in a question there, either anonymously or not anonymously, and we'll start taking some of your questions that we can direct at the team.
So let's see, let's go with the first one here. This one's for you, Jennifer. Any advice for the CI professionals out there that are faced with similar challenges?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, first I would think, figure out what your business is trying to be good at. Like, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to sell more of? Like, what's your core competency? And then unpack that and see how it's really working, because we make a lot of assumptions about things that we do and that they're fine or that they're adequate. And yet, I think if you, for example, want to scale a product like we did with VoIP, well, what does it really take? And I think any CI professional can kind of be the perfect person to step back out of the fray of the day-to-day and use some tools to do some critical thinking and really get quantifiable data. And I think that's a really neat way to start. The other thing is problem solve, right? I think my career has been defined, as I look back through it, through internal audit or just even GIS and now process optimization. you're solving problems, and a CI professional probably loves that. I think it's in your blood. So figure out what problem is in the way of your company's success, start unpacking it to really understand it, quantify it, and then propose solutions to address it. And make sure they're bite-sized, right? I think that was the key that I saw, is that small changes, just creating that checklist and combining those two roles, exponential value. Like, you don't have to overthink this and boil the ocean, as they say. Start small, take tidbits, put them in front of people. Say, have you thought about this? Do you realize this is happening? Let me make a suggestion. I can show you what the effect would be. And I think that's a great way for anybody to start having a more productive conversation and using that lens that's out of the fray.
That's great. So another question for you, Jennifer. How'd you sell that first project to the higher ups?
I definitely showed them the numbers, how much money we were spending up front to acquire customers. We had a lot of repetitive costs in door knocks and call center outbound sales type of costs. We had a lot in design, and I just showed them the numbers. I said, look, are you aware we talked to the customer 20 times? They were like, no. I said, does that seem right? And they said, probably not. I think we can do better. And I think that was it, is just having a conversation with an executive that just says, in the spirit of running your business well, are you aware that these are some things that are inefficient or causing congestion? And then they start to tune in, because you're not just trying to sell your idea or say something interesting that they may or may not really care about. You're kind of striking at the heart of what they're trying to do, which is run the business well. And if you can just pinpoint things, and it's not about finger pointing, right? You're not like, oh, this is not going well over there. You're just like, do you realize this is how we treat our customers? Oh, no. Do you want it to be better? Yes. Okay, let's talk about that. And I think, most executives are grateful for the conversation. They don't have time to see these things at this level. And when it's proactive and it's what we call a consultative partnership, they really react well. I think they engage and they're grateful.
I see a comment, not a question, but I think it's an interesting one. Saying, it says, currently your customers will accept self-install, but after COVID, they may want that personal touch again. Mm-hmm. So there's no question there, but it was an interesting observation.
Well, I can tell you, we thought about that actually, because there are people who feel better. We have a really varied age group, and if you look at our market map, we have a lot of southern territories. We have a lot of folks who really just prefer that personal touch. Yeah. And so we are offering the ability to have an in-home install at a slight cost. So because it's still going to cause a truck roll, we're making it a reasonable acquisition for the customer to just say, hey, for a small fee, we'll come out there. So it's it kind of encourages people, but it allows us to still accomplish that customer experience if they want it.
People don't want to talk to a robot. They want to talk to a human still, right?
Yeah, and it's scary. Sometimes setting up this stuff is overwhelming, and they just want somebody to do it for them. I get it. Yeah. So yes.
Especially when you're clearing 50 like us, right?
Exactly. Anything I can outsource, I'm all for it.
Okay.
Yeah, Dave, one of the next questions I really appreciate is advice, Jennifer, for a company that's just getting started with continuous improvement, because I certainly see that you have probably a pretty well-established team and you obviously have a ton of experience, but what if you're on the other side, that you don't have a lot of that experience, you're just getting started? What advice do you have?
Yeah, I'm glad I give the illusion that we've been doing this a while. No, my team actually was started in October. So I mentioned before I had founded a geospatial team. That was about 2.5 years in the making. And as a part of that, I added an arm of LINQ and a process optimization perspective. And so actually in October, the GIS team moved to the sales organization, which is pretty cool. It's usually embedded in construction and engineering. And I preserved the process piece, and we really blew out that team. So it's only been the last 6-ish months that we've really taken CI more seriously, if you will. I think my background informs it, just because I have been in internal audit, I've been in project deployments, I've been all over the place. But WOW as a company is only still really in its infancy around CI. So I would say for those who are feeling like you're just barely treading into this, so are we. You just figure out what's not working, and you start to approach it with a methodical, data-driven way of thinking about it. And you try to do it rationally. Like I said, I would just say start small. go with your gut, you're going to know things aren't working in some places. You will ask your partners, go out, talk to people. I will tell you the way that I started my GIS team, which is a little bit of a related tangent, is I just kind of put on my internal audit hat and I said, what keeps you up at night? And I was asking specifically our commercial sales team, and they said, we have no idea where our coax taps are. They're not mapped correctly. They're on paper, and we don't know where to sell customers. I was like, well, who's doing something about that? And they said, no one. I said, well, we should do something about that. And we did. And so that became really interesting because I found out about GIS. We digitized all those coax maps. We put them in front of the sales teams. And now that's why they want to sell more hosted VoIP, because they know where they can. So I would say just take a problem, ask people what keeps them up at night. It sounds so cliche, but I'm telling you, there's the nugget of where your CI career starts in your company, is just find out what's not working, find out what's in people's way, and then go think about ways that you can help them solve that. And you'll start to see momentum build. The wins will be small and they'll build, and you'll start to get momentum, and then people start to trust you. I would say take the attitude of a consultative partner, and people will trust you and welcome you in and start to give you information. Bring on your Oprah side, or whatever you want to say, you know, bring on that person who wants to learn and who's willing to hear what's going on. And you might bring a body of knowledge that says, well, I know how to fix it, I get it, you know, and that's great. You need some expertise, but also just be willing to listen and actively engage, and you'll have those moments. You'll get that aha. We've had lots of ahas. When we realized how powerful just process improvement is, that was a giant aha for us. So don't overwhelm yourself. Start small, find out what's not working, be a partner, and take it from there.
Hey, I want to actually direct that same question. That's really good advice. I want to direct that same question to you, Neil. I know you typically work with CI teams. Have you any specific examples of creative stuff that you've seen customers do?
So I think when you enable a team with a tool like LINQ, really it's, as Jennifer's, who understands what the problems are inside an organization. I saw another iceberg diagram only last week of the percentage of problems known by the exec, by the middle management, you know, and then 100% of problems are known by the people who are on the floor doing the work. But do they have a voice? People become squeaky wheels. I've been one in an organization in the past, you know, because you're constantly going on about the same thing. People end up tuning that out. So when we put LINQ into the hands of those people, it can be a really good communication vehicle for them, talking about their impact inside the organization. So make it really personal to them. So we enable these individuals very quickly to go, well, this is what the problem actually means and the impact it has on the organization, but here's a potential solution. So people have an opportunity to start talking about how they can really make a change inside the organization. And, you know, have we got any specific examples? I mean, it seems that it can kind of do anything, whether it's, as Jennifer's talked about, are we communicating with the customer more than we should? Are we thinking about the customer journey and the experience that they have as they interact with us? And that gets aligned to the employee experience. So am I using the right tool for the job? Is it creating a good mood inside the organization? And does that translate to the mood of the customer? And if we change the tool set I use, can I actually have a positive impact on how the customer feels about us as an organization? So, you know, when we see organizations actually put this tool into the hands of their teams and their people, yeah, I almost feel like anything's possible, because it becomes just a voice, and it doesn't need to be perfect. I think that's my biggest piece of advice. You don't need to have 100% of everything modeled and absolutely correct before you start having conversations about where change can have an impact, and just being able to see things as opposed to I've got to read this document. That really helps accelerate the conversation, the collaboration that happens if you get people in a room and you start asking them to contribute to this type of visualization. That really helps as well. We had a client in Auckland. The owner of the project, she said the best thing that LINQ actually did was build collaboration across the teams that I was managing, because we were all involved in the same conversation from the same perspective. It was evidence-based, it was data-driven. It removed the emotion. from the conversation, because we didn't necessarily have people on their soapboxes, because everything was contextualized. And I think that's a really big part of the overall change improvement process and process excellence inside organizations. It's enabling people to collaborate and start having conversations as fast as possible, rather than I need to know everything before I can begin. So yeah, that's probably where I see most advantage coming from using something like LINQ.
Awesome.
And I would just say, back up your opinions with data would be my simple advice on that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think it de-risks the conversation, right? And that's what's beautiful about it, is you really are using data-driven information. It's not personal. It can remove the emotion. It deflates the sense of personal, pride in it, and it makes it more about just what's the conversation we can have about this. And I think it arms you when it comes time for that salesperson who knocks on your door, says software can solve everything. You're like, can it? Let's model it. I love that. I'm like, let's put it in the tool. Let's see what really happens. And then maybe it's a great software solution and you move forward and make a business case, but you don't always have to solve your business problems with software. There's a tremendous amount of opportunity within people and process as well.
So we're coming up on Allison's 50-minute time limit. So we want to make sure everyone gets your 10 minutes before the next meeting. So I do want to, for the panel, thank everyone for joining, and thank Allison and the team for having us. We'll be following up with some information on LINQ, and certainly if you have any questions, we'd love to chat with you. So look forward to some follow-up discussions, and have a great day, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, so before you all go, make sure that you take that survey that will pop up as soon as you close the window. It's a Surveymonkey survey. We really value that feedback, and it helps us guide your future offerings. Make sure you follow us on LinkedIn or Facebook, whichever you prefer. We will post the recording to this webinar tomorrow morning, and then that's where you can keep up to date with all of the latest announcements with things like our next webinars. So June 2nd, I'll be leading virtual improvement events. So if you like to do your rapid improvement events, Kaizens, GE workouts, and you're used to doing those face-to-face, I'll give you some great advice on how do you convert those to virtual improvement events. And then that coincides with the release of the virtual improvement event guide to our CII members coming up in just a couple of days. I'm also extremely excited about the July 7th webinar with Kyle Jesse from PopSockets. He manages continuous improvement there, and he's going to talk about how do you embrace a startup culture in a more established company. So we have lots of great options for you to continue to learn about continuous improvement, to grow your skills. So please make sure you follow us, check out our website at continuous-improvement.com. And a big thank you to our guest speakers today for sharing your knowledge and experiences with us. That's truly invaluable and helps us all grow in our continuous improvement journeys. So thank you all again, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks for virtual improvement events.